Sorry. There we go. Okay. So everybody, this is my friend Katie Halvorson. She and I met while we were in grad school. She is way smarter than me. She went to Georgetown for grad school, and I went to McDaniel College. Nobody's ever heard of McDaniel College, which is fine. But we've been able to kind of stay in contact over the years. I think we met in, when was that? 2017, 2018? Something like that.
Yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Kind of as I think it was our last semester of grad school, because then I moved to Iowa. But we've been able to stay in contact, just kind of bouncing ideas back and forth with each other. Katie has taught at her institution, what is it? Concordia St. Paul, right?
Yep.
So she's been able to teach up there. She's doing a lot of cool things, kind of over in the DC, Baltimore area. And we'll kind of be able to get into a little bit of that, throughout the course of our discussion here. But Katie, thanks for joining us. And I'm excited to kind of pick your brain a little bit and have everybody just kind of get some good insight. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's, I sent you an email earlier, I guess technically yesterday. We'll kind of go through some of those questions. And then once again, I have probably 8 to 10 questions that I was able to pull from the class. So let's talk a little bit about your sport management education background. So Katie was a soccer player, so that was kind of another aspect that we kind of bonded over pretty quick. She was able to play at Concordia St. Paul. Katie's from Minnesota originally, but why don't you talk about some of the experiences you had as a sport management student, whether that was at Georgetown or Concordia? I guess what was kind of one of the big draws for you to kind of get into sport management?
Yeah, so I got my undergrad at Concordia University St. Paul. As Justin said, I was a double major in sport management and business management. I was involved in everything, student council or whatever it's called. Any student activities on campus I was trying to get involved with. Undergrad, I probably did 5 to 7 different internships, just trying to get involved in pretty much any aspect that I could in the industry. Summer I was probably doing 3 different internships between high school, college, and then I was with the Vikings as well during training camp. Grad school is a little bit different because it was a self-paced program. Part of the reason I went to grad school is because I finished undergrad early. So may as well knock it out while you can. The program, the reason I picked Georgetown is because a lot of the professors were pretty high up in the industry. If you don't know who Bobby Goldwater is, I'd go look him up. He's the reason the Nationals are in DC. He was one of my professors. I can name a lot of people that were very high up in the industry. So it has a lot of good connections. That's why I decided to go to that school.
Nice. So talk about some of your internship experiences, because in my class, kind of the way I've broken up our semester, I'll say kind of like the first 3 to 4 lecture units were kind of, okay, what does it mean to be, a professional? What does it mean to, be a member of a professional sports organization or some type of company, something like that. So, and we've talked how important it is to just kind of gain experiences, and any experience is good experience, right? And we've also talked about okay, if maybe you think that, sport marketing is something that you're interested in, and you start to do an internship and you find out that maybe that's not the route that you want to go, that's a good thing as well. Why don't you kind of speak on some of your internship experiences? Like how impactful were those experiences for you as a young person, as a young professional? And are you kind of still using some of those things now in your, full-time job out as a non-student, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to know and learn from internships is, regardless of the experience, good, bad, or otherwise, it's still a learning opportunity that you can, grow from. I pretty much have done everything from youth sports to professional sports interning. I was interning in grad school with a sport nonprofit as well. I think the biggest thing is to not be afraid to ask questions. Some of those questions or answers that I got from the questions I asked, I still, remember I'm using today. I think the biggest thing is, even if you don't like what you're doing. So for example, when I was with the Minnesota Vikings, it wasn't exactly fun to be a student athlete having to just still do your workout, but you're working a 18-hour day on your feet in the sun. But when you're doing that 18-hour a day, who are you talking to? What information are you learning? And how can you make an impact, even though it might be a small impact, but how can you make an impact on the event, organization, coworker? What can you do day by day to make something better is kind of the gist of internships, I guess.
Right. And I think for me, when I was going through my education experience, my professors always kept reiterating the importance of networking, right? I know you have a very large presence on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn, just kind of monitoring things and, trying to connect with people. How significant is the networking, especially in the sports industry, right? Like, I'm sure we've probably all seen, movies like Jerry Maguire and things like that, where, he always has a pulse on, what people are thinking and what people are doing. Why don't you kind of touch on kind of the importance of networking and some of the, maybe tips and tricks you have come up with to just keep expanding your network?
Yeah, so I'm sure you guys have heard the saying, it's not, who it's who knows you. That's a lot of what the industry is. I might know someone very high up in the Vikings organization, but do they really know me? Do we have a close connection? If we do, that can help you later on. If you don't, it's a little bit harder to use that, network to get from point A to point B. I think LinkedIn is a great tool, especially as for students. I highly recommend, if you're interested in doing marketing, trying to look up somebody who's in the industry that's doing marketing, doing informational interviews. You can do as many informational interviews as you want and ask as many questions as you want, because you don't want to get into something you don't want to do and
Right.
you don't like doing. So I highly recommend going on LinkedIn. I don't want to say stalking, but kind of stalking some people in the industry, learning about them. Don't be afraid to ask out. Most people, like to tell their story. So.
Right. So when I've been on LinkedIn since undergrad, so we'll say 2012, 2013, 2014, kind of in and around there is when, one of my professors sat us down and made us start to, create a good profile to, market ourselves. Because at the end of the day, that's when you're first taking your first couple steps within, a professional career, you do have to do a lot of marketing for yourself. So any kind of good insight that, maybe, things that you do or things that you have seen other people do to, just make a good, effective LinkedIn profile?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would the biggest thing is making sure that it's up to date
Right.
and that you're providing, LinkedIn is more of an overview of your resume, not your actual resume. So if you can provide some details of what you did, highlight some key points, but not going into as much detail as your, resume would, I think that's beneficial. But I really think LinkedIn is, again, that tool where you're trying to connect with somebody in the industry and learn what they're doing. I've had conversations with people from Capital One Arena where the Wizards Capitals play, and they're in sales. Sales isn't necessarily what I, would have wanted to do, but they might know somebody who knows somebody who could get me a job or, another connection or informational interview, if that makes sense.
Right. And I think one of the things that I think is young people kind of need to get over quickly is like, it's not embarrassing to add people on LinkedIn, right? Like
No.
if you find, the work that they're doing interesting and you're wanting to, learn a little bit more or just kind of see some of the things that, they're posting about on a regular basis, like that's what the platform is for. It's used to connect and for people to learn and, take ideas from and develop their own ideas. So I think, especially as, a college kid where, I don't really know a whole lot about, this certain topic or this certain topic. That's what LinkedIn is for. It's for, the education aspect of, taking those first couple steps to, one, build your network, but two, also kind of build your individual, knowledge or capabilities, I would say. Anything that you'd like to add to that?
I just think it goes back to, don't be afraid to get your hands into every and anything. If you want to get into marketing, still go do something in operations because there is overlap in all of these departments. And don't be afraid to reach out to somebody that you want to. You could reach out to the vice president of, I don't know, what's the Washington Redskins football team, whatever their name is now, reach out to them. You never know who's willing to talk and connect. So
right.
Don't be afraid to get involved. It's my biggest advice.
Totally. I like it. So let's kind of transition into some of the non-education professional experiences you've had, because you've had a really interesting journey. You've been able to do a lot of different things. Katie has helped out on the youth sports side, back at her soccer club in Minnesota. Now she does a lot of event management type experience, and she's done a lot of event management experience in the past. So why don't you kind of walk us through maybe one or two of your, we'll say highlights, of positions or experiences that you've been able to have kind of post Georgetown, post education, experience.
Yeah. So the first, biggest role I had after grad school is I helped open up a new Sky Zone in East Baltimore. That was pretty much starting a business from the bottom to the top and, trying to make it successful. I think too, as you're starting to look for jobs and opportunities, is thinking outside the box. Sky Zone is still technically in the sports industry, even though you might not think it is. And then from there, this is during COVID, I went home to go check on my parents. And then ended up getting a contract job. I was helping run the biggest youth soccer leagues and tournaments during the summer, covering for somebody on maternity. And then from there, I was offered a full-time job with SAFE. With SAFE, I am pretty much in charge of all of our outside event scheduling. All the universities in the Baltimore area, Merriweather, which is an outdoor pavilion concert site. We were doing stuff with the Washington football team. So, I'd work Sunday night football, which is 16, 18-hour day for security. And then next day have to go down to DC and do Monday Night Football, which is another 12+ hour day. That's kind of what's going on now. We did just take over, 24/7 operations at M&T and Camden Yards. And then we're also doing security at the Live Casino in Maryland, which is in Hanover, Maryland. Those operations, 24/7 operations, is a little bit different than event game day operations.
Okay, so let's for those of you that are not familiar with M&T Bank, that's where the Ravens play, right? So Baltimore, that complex is very similar to like Philadelphia, to where you have the baseball park, Camden Yards, you have the football stadium, and there's actually a casino, the Horseshoe Casino, all within like a big giant parking lot. And it's a really cool game day environment down there, especially during the fall if the Orioles are playing well, and then of course the Ravens. So why don't you kind of talk about some of the logistics work that you do on a game day type work day for you? Because I think event management is a very easy way to get good experience. One of my internships during college was actually on campus, and it was kind of like the game day coordinator for our men's lacrosse team, right? So a lacrosse schedule is very similar to a soccer schedule, where they're playing between 16 and 20 regular season games. So about half of those, we'll say 10 or so, are home games. So I was responsible for leading a team of about 10 people through all of the game day type setup for the arena or the stadium, tear down, running concessions, all of that type of thing. But why don't you kind of talk about some of your big projects or tasks that you and your staff do on a game day?
In regards to Ravens or Orioles?
Whichever direction you want to take, whichever one is your favorite.
So Ravens, my role for Ravens is a little bit smaller, just because, if it's Sunday, we're still going to have a Ravens game, but I might have 3 outside events. I might have Loyola soccer, I might have Towson lacrosse, and then John Hopkins volleyball, I don't know, going on at the same time. So my role on game day for the Ravens is a little bit smaller, just because I am managing all of these outside venues as well. My role, though, is, the best way I can describe it is, I'm in charge of the courtesy team, and courtesy team we call them the enforcers. So if you're intoxicated and you're doing something stupid, I'm in charge of the squad that kicks everybody out. Yep, on game days. And if I have to go into a situation, it's pretty much because something very bad happened. I'm kind of the last resort. I have gotten into a few fights, which is kind of funny because I'm not a big person. But yeah, so game day, if it's a 1 o'clock game, Leticia, who's my coworker, she's in charge of the check-in team. They're usually there. She's there at 4 a.m. The earliest staff comes in is 4:30. And then Vitor and I are usually there between 5 and 6, because we're doing some outside events or something's going on. We might have college football the day before. Kendi, he's our managing director. He's usually there at 3 a.m. because it's Kendi. He likes to make sure things are good beforehand. And then we have different times staff comes in based on when certain groups are coming in. So media is coming in at a specific time. We're going to have our staff in an hour before that. And then before our staff comes in, you have to have supervisors come in an hour before that, because you also have to brief your supervisors on what's happening that day. We have these things called hot list, which is what section, seat number, row, whatever, have the previous game, have there been kind of high incidents, just to prep our supervisors and be prepared if something does happen. But as far as our check-in process is different compared to others in the industry. I can't go into full detail about what we do, but basically we have a system that we know are constantly updating our number, so we know where our number is. If you need 1,000 people on game day, but it's 10:15, which is the normal call time for people to come in, and you're at 600 people, what do? What gates are you closing? How are you making sure all the access points on the club level are covered? Because you're not just having fans trying to get in, you also have your internal audit, which is our red team that are testing your staff as well. So there's a lot of moving parts, especially this past year with COVID, everybody having staffing issues. But compared to others, companies in the industry, we have, a system, so we know our number pretty regularly. Compared to Best, which is a competing company, they pretty much are running around asking everybody, if you need 5 people, how many people do you have? Oh, you're too short. Let me go try and figure out where to pull 2 people so that you're not too short. And then operations this year as well, because if you are 400 people short, it's making sure that pretty much nobody's in the seating bowl, because you don't need ushers at that point. You're putting all those people at the gates, or you're putting them at the club to make sure, again, those access points are covered. And then once gates are open, it's a whole different story. I'm in charge of gates B and C. Kenny's at gate A, which is our biggest gate. Vitor's at gate D. And then it's kind of doing traffic control, because people are like sheep. If the first line is all the way back to the metro train, why are people still in that first line? Because everybody else is doing it. So, we bring out rope to try and push traffic to different gates, pretty much clotheslining people at that point because they don't listen. Then once the main ingress is done, it's running around trying to figure out where our supervisors need help. Sometimes I'll get pulled into the command center if we need extra help. And then when it gets closer to the end of the game for egress, we set up bike racks for the escalator, so those coming down the escalators aren't crashing to those on the concourse, and there's no injuries. And then it gets to a point where the flow of traffic is slow, and Kenny and I would go to the southeast lobby, which is where the players exit. And it's a whole fiasco trying to get these players to leave M&T, and you're trying to stop people from walking the crosswalk so that they can get to their cars. So you have this probably 5'7" small Asian man and a 5'5" female trying to protect these 400-pound men. They have some of their security, and there's police officers out there too, but we're pretty much in charge of telling people when to stop, when to go. But that's kind of what happens in a gist on game day. A lot of running around. Yeah.
That's awesome. So how on any given game day, how many total staff are working that event?
For Ravens, this past season was hard because of COVID and staffing issues.
Right. I guess what's your ideal number for an event like that?
Around 1,000. Okay. Around 1,000. And I can tell you we were not even close to that.
Nowhere close.
Nowhere close. We were pulling, it basically got to the point where, Best, I mentioned earlier, Best is more of they do have some security, but they're more of a guest service company. So they're your ticket scanners, ushers, that kind of people. And then you have CSC, which is more security versus guest service. CSC does the security side for Washington football team, whatever they're called. So it's became interesting because your competitors are now your friends in a way, because you're just trying to make sure that the event is operational.
Right.
Yeah, I would say we were probably 300 plus short almost every game.
Wow.
So I got stuck on the club level, making sure the entire club's good and gates open in, 5 minutes. I haven't even checked my gate yet. So I'm sprinting from club to gates to field. Yeah, you're just running around like a mad person.
A bit overwhelming, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Or go ahead, what were you gonna say?
No, I mean, I loved it. You learn a lot. You learn where you can, pull people and when to pull people, when can you open up another gate because you have people checking in late. But it really, who you work with makes a difference as well. Like our part-time staff, majority of them are great. So, I mean, they're dancing at check-in, and so it makes a difference with who you're working with too.
For sure. How has kind of like the COVID policies, obviously you kind of touched on the, the fact that you were, a couple hundred people short, on almost every home game. I guess how many home games do football teams have? Is it like 8, 9?
8 to 10, give or
8
take.
to 10. Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that obviously during the COVID situation, numbers in terms of workers were down, but like what other challenges did you have during this last season with, any COVID protocols or other just challenges associated with the pandemic?
It's a good question. Staffing was definitely number one. I think number two was the NFL has certain policies with COVID, especially in regards to service level and media. Those areas you have to be vaccinated in order to even be in.
Okay.
So the service level at M&T, what they do is like a tier 1 and tier 2 credential pretty much. They have, you have your normal service level walkway. They make two, they set up bike racks, so it's 2 sides. You still have that walkway, but then you have, your tier 2, which are your normal game day staff, media, all of that. And then you have your tier 1, which are your players. They're staying on that side. So there's this kind of gap to protect players from getting COVID. In addition, to even get on the field, I pretty much wasn't really allowed on the field unless something really bad happened. But to get on the field, you had to have an armband. If you don't have that armband, you're not even allowed to touch the turf. So that presented some challenges just because we had to figure out who out of our staff is vaccinated, who's not, but who is also, good enough to be in those positions, because those are more, I guess, high profile positions.
Right.
I mean, there's a position that deals with the ownership group. Okay, that person's got to be vaccinated, but they also have to be smart enough to use the service level elevator. And so I'd say that's probably our biggest challenge. We didn't have too much as far as masks mandates with guests and stuff, so we weren't really doing anything with that this year. Last year was more of an issue, but we were at 30-40% capacity. Right. And a lot of it was family and friends. Other than that, there wasn't too much COVID and policy related, other than our own staff. So
right. What's the total seating capacity at M&T Bank? Isn't it like 65, 70?
Yeah, I can't remember the number off the top of my head.
Something like that.
It's something like that.
I was just curious.
Yeah, it says 70.
Okay.
But yeah, it's probably some games were full, some stuff definitely weren't as busy. So
okay. Well, good deal. Anything else that you'd like to add within those that kind of work experience? One final question, and then we can kind of move on to that third question or third set of questions. that I sent you. What would be your, I guess, advice for somebody who's wanting to kind of get into the operation side of things, or, you know, event management, game day management? Any specific insight within that?
I think the biggest thing is, again, thinking outside of the box. A lot of people don't think security is event management or operations, as compared to, somebody who's actually managing the actual event. They're doing setup, tear down, that kind of stuff. Security is also, operations and event management, because you have to know the ins and outs of every venue. Because if something happens, your staff is in charge of, that operations. So for example, for the Orioles, we had a couple weeks ago, I call it the war zone meeting. So it's you've seen Parks and Rec, it's that situation where they walk through a scenario and how to handle it, kind of thing. And it's, it gets to a point, at what point does communication stop from the Orioles and Maryland State Police are taking over? But what do you do, bomb threat versus a drone? So those kind of conversations. I think it's important to know that if you want to do game day operations, there's more than just your normal, standard game day operations.
Right.
Everybody has operations. Marketing has operations. Sponsorship has operations. I mean, you're putting up banners, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Good deal. So I'm going to start to pull up some of those questions that I pulled from the group.
Mm-hmm.
One good question, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but what's kind of the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome to get where you are today within the security task force, security group that you're working with?
And getting a full-time, or because those are two very different answers.
Give me both then.
Okay, so you're probably not gonna like this answer, but one of them is being a female in the industry.
Okay.
And the good old boys club. The company I work for is owned by a family, and it's a lot of family friends that work for the company, family in general that work for the company. So it's, trying to make your way in to that family.
Right.
A lot of it is being a female and not looking the part, or, being this macho man. Was a lot of it from that side. Well, say the question again, because there's another.
What's the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome to get where you are today?
And then the other piece is, I would say, probably having mutual respect with staff. I don't use my title unless I need to.
Right.
A lot of staff treat me differently than, Leticia or Vitor, for example, because I've been in their shoes. They've seen me be in their shoes. So it's having that mutual relationship, but also being able to know, like, hey, we are friends, but what you're doing is not okay.
Right. And it's interesting that you bring that point up, because that's kind of the middle portion of the class. So to kind of give you some context, we just had our spring break last week. So that's why I was in Utah when we were messaging back and forth. But the week before, kind of the 3-4 weeks leading into spring break, we kind of started to talk about, a lot of leadership stuff and kind of management structure and organizational structure. And I think that was one of the big points that we as a class got to, was, being able to, have and maintain really strong relationships with the people that you're working with. and, making everybody feel, important and valued and whatnot. So when you do have to have kind of some of those harder or more difficult, trying conversations, it's a little bit better received rather than, just kind of barking down to somebody. Because if you kind of have that common ground or that relationship, it makes those kind of more challenging conversations go a little bit better and kind of a little bit more, I guess, well received, if you don't necessarily have that relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know. So, I mean, I have 1,000+ employees part-time that are, looking for work. So it's, how does person A handle this communication versus person B? I have different relationships with different people, and I know how different people react to how you say certain things.
Right.
But I think too, something that we constantly talk about on the event side, your admin role is important, but going out to these smaller events, you have an event, Loyola soccer, it's let's say staff of 15. It's going out and saying hi to those 15, 20 people working, and they absolutely
Right.
love it. So
right.
I think it's important.
For sure. So next question here, was this job something that you wanted to get into from the beginning, or maybe did you kind of find your niche along the way? Kind of what led you to kind of pursue this type of work?
It's a good question. So I'm someone that likes to plan. So I planned in undergrad that I was going to go to grad school, law school, and then, work in the council department for NFL or MLB. When I was an undergrad, I was having conversations with the Vikings. They said if I went to law school, I could intern in their council department. Well, graduating grad school at 22, 23, you're like, I'm not doing law school after that point. So that kind of changed. In grad school, I was interning with, at the time, the Washington Redskins. I was in their partnership marketing, which is their sponsorship department. I absolutely loved everything I was doing with them. That department's a little bit harder to get into, in my opinion, than the operations side, because operations, they have more part-time versus sponsorships do. And then while I was interning, I was also doing some stuff with Safe part-time. And then I think I realized that everything Safe was about, the family atmosphere, looking out for each other and all of that was something I'd rather be in versus, we all know how the Redskins organization was, that kind of, I guess, atmosphere. I think for me, it was more about who am I going to work with than the role itself, because you can always change your role, and again, what you're doing in marketing overlaps with operations. So it was more about who am I going to work with? Can I grow with who I'm working with?
Right.
What other opportunities are there with the company? And will I like bits and pieces of the current role? So
yeah. Okay. Let's well, I'll give you two more questions because I can talk for hours if I'm not watching the clock. But what skills does it take to be really effective in this position? And I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, kind of the planning, logistics work of just, coordinating 1,000 different people and, a lot of different areas in a massive, arena and stadium. But and any other skills you'd kind of like to touch on within your team's role?
I think the biggest thing is, again, they're basic skills, but they're super important, is, are you organized? Do you manage time, efficiently? Because if you have college football Saturday and then you have, Sunday night football Sunday and then Monday night football Monday, how are you going from A to C and making sure each event's successful? again, I think it's doing the simple things right.
Okay.
I think that's a huge piece.
When do you find time to sleep? If you're working
Good
days?
question. I do now because I'm no longer in charge of the 24/7 operations.
There we go. And then last question here from the group, and then I'll stop the recording and then we can visit a little bit. What is one thing that you want aspiring sport managers to know before going into the sports industry? That's a good one to end on.
It is. I would say that it may look like glamour on the front side, but the back end, it's not all glamour. You're working your butt off. You're putting in, these long days. It's also different being a contractor versus working for the team with responsibilities. But something may look like fun because, I'm a fan of baseball. Being a fan is a very small piece, but that you're going to be grinding 80 plus games, long days. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, good deal. Once again, I'm stoked this was able to work out for us to connect and just kind of have a 45-50 minute conversation on things to kind of just give some insight into kind of what you do and some of the roles that you've had and kind of the journey and the path that you've taken. So thanks again. I'm going to stop the recording and then we can visit a little bit. Okay.
Yep.